here to sort of preserve our precious resources, that being producer directors that actually show up to meetings. It's going to help us maintain that without stretching people too thin. And managerially speaking, we're basically doing it anyway. So we'll look forward to a more formal launch of that. It's still yet to become official, but we've got our website, farmingsmarter.com, and all of our emails are Farming Smarter. So if you see that, then it's the old Sarah. And Brent Nichols not here today, but he'll be our communication guy. If you're seeing emails from him, that's usually updating you guys on when the crop walks are going to be, conferences, and that sort of thing, so you don't have to kick them out of your spam kind of idea. So I'd like to keep this very informal. Yes, sir?
Do we have to sign up for his emails? Or is it...
If you're not on a mailing list, absolutely give us...
You gotta get them from Ross. But...
You don't get them from us? And you've got my email? Here you go. Send me an email, we'll put you on the list. And we've also got more of an extensive mailing list. So obviously we'd like to be able to move everyone towards an email thing. It's pretty easy to do if you actually read them. That's the trick, I find. Our overall mailing list is about 1,200 people yet. We've built our email list only to 500. So still a little bit of reluctance. And now Canada Post is actually looking at a strike. So if you're not on an email list and you're hoping to keep updated to these events and the strike happens, and it's up to you guys to keep in touch. So just a brief little summary of our experiences with the Winter Pulses. We've come through tours. How many of you guys have seen some of the plots, either ours or Ross's, in the last 3 years with a show of hands? Yeah, so most of you have been around. Is this new to you guys? Yeah, just a little bit. Okay, so we've the last 3 years we've been working on a project. This will be the third year now, trying to complement what Mark Olson's been doing in his projects with Ross that's across Alberta. We tried to add a little bit of fill in the gaps that maybe that project wasn't holding. So this particular plot that we're looking at behind us is looking at seeding dates of both lentils and peas, but we also were thinking about the idea of using the winter lentils and the winter peas in an early spring application, so as early as you could possibly get in. And this year that happened to be only April 28th. Usually, we were trying to think maybe a March seeding date, or early April isn't all that uncommon even for spring peas. So just because of that good winter hardiness, that frost tolerance that these varieties have. And a lot of our results actually from the last few years is that the spring seeded winter crops were actually out yielding our spring crops. So there's very good yield potential, particularly in the lentil. We noticed that. Last 2 years we've been very, very dry falls. We've had a tough time getting things established here. We haven't necessarily had the best survival. This year is probably the best that we've seen, and I think we just had really, really good fall seeding conditions. Most of the plots were seeded at 2 dates around September 15th and then the end of September 29th. And then we came in here in a randomized design looking at two seeding dates in the spring as well. So our early one was April 28th and our late was May 17th. So we're looking at, and you feel free to come in and take a closer look, ask questions if you like. The one thing that we've been noticing so far in the last few days is the lentils are a little bit under stress. And I think the cool conditions, you can see some of the tops of the plants are starting to get little white blemishes on them. We've actually been holding off spraying our lentils because the last 3 days have been just hovering around that 0 degree mark. But if we move down, all of a sudden we've got a much bigger crop here. So this would be the late seeding date on the Morton lentils. Usually they're more further advanced than this, but again, you saw the weather data from Ross. Cool conditions, lots of moisture, but certainly off to a good start. As soon as it warms up, I think they're gonna really take off. So do you think this one's gonna out yield our spring crop this year? Yeah, this is a fall seeded winter lentil. Spring's definitely a better stand. And keep in mind that's the later seeded date. The early seeded date one's over here. Do you think there might be an advantage just on that one? Yeah. I'd fully expect that if everything goes well, our early seeded fall lentil is going to destroy the spring lentil. So that's that thing that gets people excited about the opportunity that fall seeded pulses might have. That, and for once you might actually have a crop off early enough that you could follow up with winter wheat and not have to seed the middle of October with our late harvests that we'd have in the last couple of years. The biggest issue we have has been the winter survivability. Yes?
What's the date of seeding that?
That one's September 15th. Yeah.
And what was your snow cover here through the winter? Was it covered all winter?
Snow cover was pretty reasonable. I think, there's actually not a lot of stubble, standing stubble here. It's sort of deteriorated, but, overall, I think the big thing is like Ross mentioned, the soil temperatures really didn't get that cold. We had good snow cover, but also we didn't have any gaps in the winter. It was a solid winter where these didn't start growing again. And I think more often than not, our winter kill happens in the spring. These things start to grow again, and then it gets hit again by another few weeks of winter. So we had a good solid winter all the way through, good snow cover. As a matter of fact, I have a very good stand of spring wheat that survived that was planted last fall. So we've got a study over actually in this block here where our winter wheat is, where we're testing some seed treatments that are supposed to enhance winter survival. And as a check, we always throw a spring wheat in there to get an idea of how hard of a winter is. And we have a good enough stand of spring wheat that was fully established last fall that survived the winter. And I guess we were thinking how cold it was, but as far as winter survivability, this year was really, really good.
So is the minimum temperature about the same then, about -8 for the limit of survivability?
I think they try to target around -5. I'm not sure. Ross or Rob might be able to answer that question a little bit better.
What was the question?
What's sort of the break point for soil temperature where we expect winter survivability to become an issue? Is it -5? -8?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so you're bang on.
We've got a lot, we've never actually had real cold kill here on lentil or pea. We've had,
Yeah.
you say, marginal conditions for establishment in the fall.
Yeah.
Is that,
We've been recently trying to identify that.
is that winter camel? Like, is that, I don't know, is that fall winter? Is that winter camel, or is it? Because there is a,
I don't think that's camelina. No. Any camelina experts?
I had a field one year, but
there
It's a possibility, but I
this
don't,
is,
it looks a little
I
odd.
think this is a mustard that we identified on the jail about 15 years ago, Jim Moyer and I, and it's obviously spreading.
Yeah.
So it's a winter annual from Montana and Wyoming, I think. We have to double check that, but
isn't this what the weed experts do to secure job security?
yes. Yeah, we hand picked it at that time, so we'll have to. It's obviously spread a little bit here, so it's. If that's what it is, yeah.
Yeah.
It looks like stinkweed from a distance, but it's.
Got a yellow flower though.
Yeah.
Okay. Any more questions? We'll move on to sort of our next site here. Yep. Yeah.
I'm thinking this is. Yeah, I think it's a mustard species, and Jim and I identified that.
Ken, what
Yes.
would be about the latest you could seed? Like what?
We've actually seeded these up to the end of October, and then the last 2 years, under the very dry fall conditions, we had better survival with the later seeding dates, which was more likely a dormant seeding type thing, so they didn't come up until the spring.
Do you prefer like winter wheat that they come up a while?
Yeah, but the trick is we don't want them to get too big, because if
Okay.
you seed these too early, they'll actually start flowering and then they lose their winter hardiness. So another study that we haven't done what might be interesting would be to seed them very early and then sort of terminate growth with either a harrow application or something like that, just to sort of stop it, because that stage that we want to hit for optimum winter survival is tricky to plan for because you don't know what the weather is like in the fall. So this is the identical plot that we were just on with the different seeding dates and then the spring seeding as well, but with peas. So we've got this plot here looks like a winter. So that'd be the late seeded Wyndham, which is the variety that we've been using in all of our trials for the last few years. And beside me is actually the spring seeding date of Wyndham, And if you look closely, there's actually a tremendous amount of pea leaf weevil feeding too, if you're not familiar with how that looks.
Exactly what I like to see.
Yeah. Yeah. So the one thing that our experiences have shown that are a little bit different than Ross's, because he grows better plots than we do, we try to do it like farmers do. So the peas that didn't overwinter in very thick stands, we had harvestability issues. So they like to really lie flat, and they're usually harvestable sometime in mid-July. But with a weak stand, they tended to shell out a lot. So we've had issues trying to harvest them. I think in this year will be a lot better. So in that regard, you know, if you don't get great establishments, I'm actually preferring the lentils as far as standability at around harvest. This year, I think both are going to look good, and it'll be interesting to find out what type of yield advantage. And Ross will talk to his experiences in the yield advantage, but as high as 50% higher than the spring seeded crops. Our issue is consistency of winter survival that we're going to work on, and we'll get down to it. I've actually got some breeder plots, some variety trials of the breeder Kevin McPhee, and while this year most of them look pretty good, there are some differences, but he's being strained to get better winter survival varieties, because he's now moved to Fargo, North Dakota, which is a little tougher environment than he was used to down in Washington State. So feel free to take a look at the plots as we wander down.
Do you have the seed treatment studies?
Yes. Yeah, we'll take a quick look at that too.
This is the third year you've done that.
Yeah.
What are you finding with that?
Winter peas are just getting a lot more feeding.
Yeah, the nodules?
And the nodules. Yeah.
So how would you control that, Ken?
The pea leaf weevil?
Yeah.
Well, we'll jump into the pea leaf weevil study right now. Before the 2-year trial that we were working on winter peas, Rob Dunn had helped Sarah get involved with a study looking at using winter peas as a trap crop for pea leaf weevil. And back then we were using the Austrian variety, which is a forage pea. It's actually the most winter hardy of all the variety. That's where Kevin McPhee originally crossbred that winter hardiness from. And from that study, we were already finding that there was a certain concentration around the field edges. This study here was actually to look at spring peas versus winter peas while assessing the nodules. We actually had a premise that maybe the winter peas would grow so fast that they would outpace the pea leaf weevil, and our premise was completely wrong. The last 2 years in the study so far has found that they're doing an effective job of concentrating the pea leaf weevil, but we're also seeing that in the nodule feeding. So we actually dig up these plants at around flower, and we go to Hector's lab and we wash out the nodules and assess how many of the nodules are being fed upon. And it's about 40% higher in the winter peas, which basically confirms the effectiveness of it as a trap crop potential. So if we ever get into a situation where, you know, like Hector mentions, we don't want to spray an entire field, we don't want to kill out all the parasites and beneficial insects, that there is potential of using winter peas as a trap crop for pea leaf weevil.
Do you see any effect of the cruiser max in the winter peas on the weevil?
Yes. Yeah, a slight effect. The Cruiser Max seed treatment has actually also been seen to have anecdotal evidence of improving winter hardiness. And we're actually on our 2nd year of the study. We noticed it on these plots too, that the Cruiser plots looked a little bit better. They look like there's a little better stand. They don't really understand what the science is behind it, but you could understand they're going to be exploring that as much as possible. We're also actually looking at the same thing when it comes to a few seed treatments from all companies in some winter wheat trials. We're not going to look at those today, but what I've been seeing so far is that I can confirm this anecdotal evidence is these insecticidal seed treatments are doing something to protect the plant and improve their winter hardiness. So I think that'll help on that side, but then it makes it a little difficult to decide, is the Cruiser seed treatment actually helping yield because of that winter survival, or is there carryover on insect control? They suspect that because of the time frame from seeding in the fall into spring when the weevils are out, that insecticidal property should be gone by that point, but not too sure.
Would you say you're seeing more nodules in the Cruiser Max?
I'd have to check on that.
Yeah.
Couldn't say it off the top of my head.
In the spring crop, we tend to see that.
Yeah. Yeah. Any questions there? We'll keep rolling then. There's two varieties that he has that's very tall. One of them's Spectre and one's a numbered one. So.
Is it on the left side?
Yeah, see, this is the numbered one, and I think that one down there would be Spectre.
This he's developing for a forage out.
Yeah, it could be.
We put those with winter triticale.
Yeah, they looked really nice. Yeah. So I mentioned the variety trial. This is Dr. Kevin McPhee's variety trial. They look like they're a little bit shorter plots than they are because he didn't send me enough seed to do my usual 8-meter plots, but very, very good overall winter survival. You can see it's a pretty thick stand. I'm used to them not surviving that well, so we've been upping our seeding rates on everything, and then this year I probably didn't need to. So we do have some good stand establishments. You can see he's got a few mix of some taller varieties. Spectre is the one down there. This is a numbered variety that's likely a forage application. He's got both yellow and green peas that he's working on, and some of the big issues that he's working on as far as quality is improving the seed coat color. Right now there's a little bit of a ghosting effect that that certain buyers don't like, a little bit of a pattern on the seed coat. That's one priority that he's working on breeding out, and of course that winter survivability is a key thing for him. So fortunately there's somebody that's not too far off that's working on this breeding type. I still would say that if this is something that would be a priority for producers, that it would be very important to get a Canadian breeder working on it. I just don't see it happening anytime soon, so we're going to have to hopefully depend on, if we're going to continue to work with this, is just work with Kevin's lines.
Ken, you said you bumped up the seeding rate. Did you mention what you did seed these at?
Yeah, I think we were actually going about 150 seeds per meter squared on the fall planting. Yeah.
These ones specifically were 130.
These ones are a little lower because we were limited on seed. Yeah.
The other ones were higher.
So it's a little high. Yeah. Am I doing okay on time, or are we just about done?
Ken,
Yes, sir.
somebody was asking me when do the peas gonna outgrow the pea leaf weevil, and usually we say around the 6 node stage. Once the crop is past that 6 node stage, and you haven't seen too much damage, then you shouldn't be too worried about it.
Yeah. We could stop right here, actually. Ironically enough, that was originally our premise on that pea leaf weevil trial, was that the winter peas were going to outgrow the pea leaf weevil. So far we haven't found it. This year we might. You can see that a lot of those peas are probably going to outgrow the pea leaf weevil, whereas the weevils just started feeding in the last week, so some big differences in environmental conditions. So another part of our trial that we've been working on, and finally are having some success this year, is how to manage herbicide issues, because peas and lentils, obviously there aren't a lot of options. We don't currently have any Clearfield winter peas that I know of. I'm not sure if you've heard Ross, if he's getting into that. Yeah, so we don't have the Clearfield option. Obviously lentils is a bigger issue. Some of the big things that we know from our other winter crops, like winter wheat, winter annuals, are going to be an issue. So how do we control those broadleaf winter annuals in winter pulses? What they do down in the States is a tank mix of the Pursuit and Roundup. So the first couple of years we concentrated on different rates of Pursuit for both lentils and peas. Didn't have a lot of luck, to be honest with you. We weren't getting really great competitive crops. You really find out how important crop competitiveness is in herbicide control when you don't have a stand. But the Pursuit and Roundup pre-seed burn down alone hasn't been effective. So what we're doing this year is looking at different timings of edge. So because you want to plant these early, we want to get these in September 15th, it's typically a little bit too early to be applying edge, because most of it's probably going to gas off before the winter annuals even germinate. So that's why we did two application dates of the edge. So basically we put it down right before reseeding. I think the dates are there. Can you help me out? What is it, September?
September 24th?
So September 24th would have been our early edge application, and then we came back in November 9th, I believe. So the idea there is that we're putting the edge down right at winter time. Temperatures are lower, hoping that it's not going to gas off, so that it'll be released in the spring when the winter annuals are coming. And to be honest, what I've seen so far is that both applications have been working pretty good on the herbicide control. I do feel that we're going to need a spring application, so this is what we call a split plot design, where we're looking at both Viper, which is the old was that Solo Bazagran, and Odyssey. So some of the issues with the in-crop applications that we're concerned about with winter peas is that they're at the stage you want to spray them very early in the spring, so you get conditions like this, cold and cloudy, which can tend to be a little bit hot on the crop. But I think we can work around that. What I'm saying is we do need that spring application of a herbicide, especially under more weedy conditions. Some of the things that we're studying particularly are the things like flicksweed, stinkweed, and I'm noticing that the canola, volunteer canolas, can be a bit of an issue as well. So I'm thinking, that some kind of just like your regular peas, a fall applied edge, and Solo or Viper or Odyssey in the spring. We just have to be careful with it. So, any questions there? Excuse me.
Yeah, I have a question. If you want to grow it just for a cover crop, how big would the plant have to be to give you any amount of nitrogen that would be usable for the next season?
Well, I'd probably defer a lot of that to Ross. Has way more experience in that neck of the woods. But we've got different varieties. We've got the forage varieties that are probably more suitable for a cover crop application. They got more winter hardiness, a lot more growth. As far as you're talking about growing them in the fall and then taking them out?
Right.
Sorry, Bob Blackshaw is another person that can answer that quite well, but he's not here. I'll just pass it to you right now.
That's what you want to repeat the question?
Yeah, if you just want to grow it as a cover crop to hold your soil for the winter time, but you also want to get a nitrogen bang out of it, how big would the plants have to be to generate any amount of nitrogen?
And that would be following potatoes?
Probably potatoes, yeah.
So, I'd say you want to get them in just as quickly as you can. That'd be the first concern.
Okay.
So you probably want to get them in by the third week of September. Would that be reasonable for you?
Yeah, yeah.
So, but if you can get them in by the third week of September, that's about as late as you really want to get. You want to seed winter peas, first of all.
Right.
But as long as you had a normal fall, those peas should grow to probably, depending on the variety, at least 3 to 4 inches. But odds are you're not going to get a whole lot of nitrogen fixing. It'll give you some ground cover protection, kind of help hold the soil. But it really takes usually 4 to 6 weeks even before that plant is actually fixing nitrogen. So really in the fall, you're going to get some nodules formed, but probably very little nitrogen fixation.
Okay.
So really be in the spring before you start to see much fixation. So I would kind of see, if you're just going to take them out in the spring, odds are you're really not going to gain much in terms of nitrogen. It'll give you some cover protection, but probably not any nitrogen fixation, or very little.
Okay. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. So we've also got the same trial with the lentils. The only difference with the lentils, obviously, we just went with a low and high rate of Sencor, because that's pretty much the only option we have with conventional lentils. But that pretty much wraps it up for what I wanted to show you here today. We also at this site have the regional variety trials for peas, lentils, and chickpeas. They're all pretty small right now, so I'm not sure that we'd bother looking at them, but if you're ever interested, give us a shout and you can come take a look at those. But otherwise, I think we can pack it up and go check out Ross's site.
So we'll take about a half an hour. This site, we won't take a long time, but really the focus today was just to kind of have a look at our winter peas, winter lentils, and winter fava beans. We do have this one little trial. When I say little, this is very, very little. Like each one of these rows for 3 meters long is one genotype. And these are all different breeding lines from the University of Alberta. Habib is the canola breeder there, and we've been running these trials down here for him. And so we've actually got 4 replicates. These 2 replicates were seeded into stubble, and those 2 replicates over there, we deliberately worked it and then seeded it just to see if there was much difference. And actually, what we seeded into standing stubble actually did look a little bit better. The question is, can we grow winter canola in southern Alberta? And that's been a question for 20 years. I remember many years ago, some of you might have remembered the Canola Council had a fellow here by the name of Keith Topinka, and he and I put some trials out about, I would guess to be about 20 years ago, and they did really well. When we got so excited, it wasn't even funny. Next year we did it again at 4 sites, everything winter killed. As that kind of smartened us right back up again. But we know that winter canola is possible. They grow it in Europe and in China, and so some of the crosses here are from materials in Europe and in China, trying to find and develop winter canola with better winter hardiness. And these trials actually look very good this year, not bad last year. 2 years ago, they were actually fairly poor. But these are all new crosses that he's actually got out. And if you look carefully, you can see 311 and 312, there's nothing growing. So those varieties, those genotypes didn't even survive. But, and he's actually been here once last fall to take samples after everything was up, and then he was here about a week ago taking more samples. So this is not something I want you to go home and say, next year we're going to go winter canola. This is well down the road. But I thought it'd be just kind of fun just to have a look at these, just to say it's something that's being looked at, and who knows what's down the road if we can get some winter hardiness into the canola so we could actually survive southern Alberta winters. We might actually be onto something. Because wouldn't it be nice? Like this field over here is seeded to spring canola. I think I'd much rather have my canola at this stage of the game right now than over there, but then that's just a fact of life.
Do you have enough bees for pollination this time of year?
I think that might be questionable, but right now the big thing is just looking for winter hardiness. Pardon me?
Just humming in that plant.
Yeah, actually, you know, there's lots of activity, and I think because there's so few flowers around other than dandelions, they're probably doing okay.
So when did this seeded,
Ross? This would have been seeded in the 3rd week of August, and so that's kind of when we seed. And ideally, I think if we ever get to the point where we are going to grow winter canola, we'd be looking at late August to seed winter canola. But like I say, that's well down the road. I'll tell you one story of my daughter, when she was 5, developed type 1 diabetes. And I remember the nurses saying, well, in 5 years they're going to have a cure for type 1 diabetes. She's now 21, and now they're saying in 10 years we should have a cure. So the way I look at it, this is something on the horizon. It'd be something interesting to watch, but don't worry about hanging your hat on growing winter canola in the next few years. But it's something interesting just to watch and track. And I really think it has potential down the road if we can find some lines with some really good winter hardiness. But it's not something we would be. Well, I'm not going to say 10 years. I'm going to say sometime down the road. Hopefully I'm still alive when they have it. But,
what's amazing with canola is that if there is promising genetics, you know how quickly they can come to market.
Yeah, 3 years.
But these are rapid types too, which is interesting.
Yes.
These are all rapids.
Yeah,
From,
Yep.
a lot of them from Scandinavia.
Great.
When could you harvest these?
Well, I would think that it'll probably be around very early July. And actually, in the past, we've actually been ready to harvest usually in that first 2 weeks of July. Usually in that range. This year, with things being a bit cooler, it's probably going to be a bit later than that, but not much later. So why don't we just kind of wander over and have a look at our peas?
What did you say there? I thought you said not to
Ken's got more pea weevil than you do.
Maybe a little bit more. We have some winter Fabibeans over there, and they'll love that stuff. But if you look carefully, there's actually lots of seedlings.
It's about the same.
I wouldn't say it's a whole lot less. Yeah. So a few stragglers over at the canola, they get kind of excited about looking at that stuff flowering. But I was just going to say, is Troy still over there? Yeah, he's over there, so maybe I won't kind of say any more. But really what I was going to talk about here, I'm just going to look at my notes here, but we've actually been doing this study for, this is the 3rd year, with winter peas, winter lentils, and winter fava beans. And it's part of a study where we've actually had trials at Lethbridge, Brooks, Lacombe, and Edmonton. Generally, Lethbridge has survived the best, followed by Brooks. There's been a little bit of survival at Lacombe, and really no survival at Edmonton. So as you go north, the survival has gotten progressively poor. And the main reason is, in all cases, we have good germination emergence in the fall, but it's really the overwinter temperatures that really control whether the peas are going to survive or not, or lentils or fava beans.
And when we start to see temperatures down in that -8 to -10, that's really probably the kind of the critical thing. But we've been actually very lucky, and at Lethbridge usually our survival is about the best. Last year though, our yields at Lethbridge weren't that great. We were just kind of over to the west about 200 meters, and we had lots of standing water, and that actually was a limiting factor. We just kind of got flooded out. Even though we got the water pumped off, the peas and the lentils did not do that well. However, at Brooks, the winter peas and winter lentils actually did very well. The yields on a dryland basis were up in that 70 to 80 bushel range for the peas. They did very well, and out yielded the spring peas and the spring lentils. They did very well. So as things progress, like this will be the third year, we're going to do this one more year. We're going to be seeding the same study again. And actually, we're going to add a couple sites. We're going to have one on my Bow Island, Brooks, Lethbridge, and High River. We probably will put a site in at Lacombe, but we've pretty much given up on Edmonton. There's no point in even trying up there anymore. So we're going to maybe have more of a Southern Alberta focus. But by next year, I think that we should be able to develop at least some general basic recommendations for winter peas and winter lentils. Both are doing very well. The winter Fabibeans that we've been working with, you can scratch that from your list. They have not been doing well. They always germinate and emerge. Last year it was not bad last spring. This spring the survival wasn't as good, and we actually did not have, it seemed like we had a harsh winter, but from a soil temperature standpoint, it wasn't that bad. And anything that did survive in terms of the Fabibeans, some of those early frosts in the spring actually started to grow, kind of caught up with them. So survival was very poor again with the Fabibeans. So I'm not optimistic with Fabibeans and down the road in the near future, but I do think that winter peas and winter lentils may have a place. So just to kind of summarize, for the winter peas, we're actually seeding at 3 different seeding rates: 75, 112, and 150 seeds per square meter. So 75 seeds per square meter would translate to about 7 plants per square foot. Would be kind of the bottom of our optimum range for dry land. And looking at our trials here, this is an example. Here's early seeded at 75, and when I say early seeded, typically we would try to seed around October 1st for our early seeding. Mid-seeding date would be around the 15th of October, and our last seeding date, the late seeding, would be around the end of September. That's always our target, because things were so late this year, or this last fall, that our first seeding date was actually the 13th of September. So about almost 2 weeks later than what we wanted. So this strip would have been seeded all the way up. We seeded on the 13th of September. Then the next strip that said, we call that mid, and that would have been actually the end of September. And really only the early seeded was up and well established. The other, the mid and late, the mid was just kind of emerging, and the late seeded didn't actually emerge. It was germinated but not emerge.
The higher plot there in the center, what's that?
I knew somebody had asked me, so that's why I brought my plot plan book along. But that should be the high rate.
Is there just one variety in the center?
There's 2 actually.
Okay, that would be Spectre.
They're the same.
First seeding date for Spectre, maybe?
So that was the 150. So right here is the 75 rate, and right in front of Rob there, just beside Rob, is the 150 rate. So that would be the highest rate. And so you can see we've got a pretty good stand established, but that would be kind of double the normal seeding rate, or what we would typically seed peas at.
That's not a different variety?
Oh, actually, yeah. This was the winter yellow, and that was the winter green too. So that's it's also a different variety. Yeah, sorry. And actually, if Rob just steps over, the next one is actually the same variety. Yep. Actually, just straight ahead. Actually, just straight to the north. So next one over.
This one here?
So on our right, that's 150 plants, and on our left of Rob is 113 plants. So same variety, just the 2 different seeding rates. And so you see that higher seeding rate has actually caused it also to be a little more competitive and grow a little taller as well.
What's that equate to bushels per acre? That 150?
I usually always go by plants per square foot, typically. So that would be 113 plants would be around 11 plants per square foot, and the 150 would be around 14 to 15 plants per square foot. And then that really depends. You really can't say pounds per acre or bushels per acre because the seed size is so variable.
Winter peas tend to be quite small seeded size, small size seeded.
Yeah, and that's the one downside of the winter peas is that they are smaller seeded. So now as Rob is walking along, those would be some of the spring seeded, and actually he will actually just even walk down a little bit more.
We might need to spray these for weevil, Rob.
Yeah, the new stuff is coming through. You really gotta get some of that. But just to summarize, basically so far, just to kind of summarize, I would say that the 113 to the 150 seeding rate, the two higher seeding rates we're using on the first seeding date tends to give us the best yield. So ideally you would want to seed sometime in that first 2 weeks of September, based on what we've seen so far, using the somewhat higher seeding rate of 113 to 150. So those are giving us the best plant populations and the best yield. But like I said, the yield of Lethbridge was compromised because of the flooding conditions last year. And basically that's what the results that Brooks are showing are very clearly. The two varieties that Brooks out-yielded, the winter peas out-yielded the two spring peas varieties. And Brooks was quite a while looking at last year. And like I said, we have a site at Bow Island this year. We tried to get a site in High River last fall as well. They were just so wet up there we couldn't even get it in. So the weather's been definitely against us.
We had a demo site in Medicine Hat that survived pretty well this year too.
Okay.
Last year.
So that would be sort of just it in a nutshell. So things are progressing. You know, I'm not sure that we're quite at the point where we'd actually recommend that farmers go and try this on a whole hog, but it's certainly something to look at. And down the road, maybe wanted to try 40 acres in the fall, see it, have a look at it. But probably my greatest concern still with the winter peas and the winter lentils is that you want to seed into some good moisture in early September. And the last couple of years we've had that. Many years in early September things are fairly dry, and then that would be a limiting factor.
What seed availability?
Well, you'd have to get the seed out of Washington. Actually, yeah, this seed would have to come out of Washington, right? Yeah, because these, the breeder, as Ken mentioned, was at Washington State University, Ken McPhee, and he's now in North Dakota, but these varieties actually came from Washington. But it definitely, again, like I say, it's something to keep an eye on, and they actually offer some good opportunities, and the yields have actually been quite good, so certainly can't complain.
Do you think there's more or less opportunity than the canola?
Oh, I'd say there's way more opportunity in the short term for winter peas. In terms of winter canola, I wouldn't even recommend anybody to even try winter canola until we have some lines that have some proven winter survival. And we'll have to watch Habib's work from U of A, how he progresses. Because these lines, most of them actually survived the winter very well. But in terms of soil temperature, the soil temperature didn't get that cold because we had excellent snow cover. If we had a time where if those temperatures got down to -10, you'd be curious to see how some of these lines would have actually worked out. Our kind of wander along Scepter and Wyndham, and these again are the different seeding rates, but both varieties have their strengths and weaknesses. One is a taller variety, one's a shorter variety. The taller variety can get so tall it can actually lodge if you get too much moisture. But how often on dry land do we have too much moisture? So again, those are really the only two lines we have available right now.
Which one's the tall one?
I'm trying to remember. Actually, Scepter is a taller variety. So for the Fava beans, the winter Fava beans, generally they haven't turned out that well. That particular row there is the spring seeded stuff, so that's why it looks a little bit better. Generally they haven't turned out really well. Anything that's survived, if you look at these, you can see that the pea leaf weevil likes peas, but they love Fava beans. So they've really been laying a licking on them. But Well, what we've done so far has not been promising, and I wouldn't even recommend anybody even try winter fava beans at this point.
How about March seeded winter fava beans or something?
I would say that probably you might as well just go with fava beans, spring fava bean, because odds are they will probably be better suited to our conditions.
So if they didn't survive this year, there's probably
No,
a lot of potential.
I would say I would actually recommend we not even include them in our trial next year. You know, this is 3 years in a row. They've not done well, and I think we can pretty much write them off until, you know, if somebody comes along with some lines that are better winter hardiness, we can have a look at them. But if they won't perform any better than this, I think it's that's, you know, we've done enough to establish we don't want to be playing around with them.
Looks like the weevils are into the spring stuff too.
Yep, they don't waste any time. Yep, you know, when there's some green stuff around, they're gonna go for it. So the next one is a bit of a surprise. I'll let you have a look at the next winter crop just for fun. Occasionally I do things for fun because I'm a government guy and I've been around long enough that the only way they're going to get rid of me is if they lay me off, and so sometimes I do things just for fun. This is actually winter safflower. We have 3 different lines from Washington State University, and we put them in at 3 different planting times at 3 different seeding rates. This is a demo just to see if there's any potential. And when you look at across here, there's actually some potential. So we're going to actually have to go through this and decide which of the 3 varieties was maybe looking not bad, and perhaps get some more seed and try a little bit more. But again, winter safflower, is there any potential? Hard to say yet, but certainly there's more. Just looking at this, I'd say there's more potential for winter safflower definitely than winter fava bean. But again, don't go home and try this next fall. But because this was the first time we've ever tried it, was last fall, and just looking at some of the treatments, it actually looks like there might be a little bit of potential. But we'll have to play around with it for a couple of years, again, just to kind of see if there's any potential, just on a demonstration basis for another year. It looks like there's some promise, and we might actually start doing some actual replicated trials to see if there's further potential. But I thought I'd just show you these just for fun, just so you're aware that there are some other winter crops that might have some promise down the road. But time will tell. But right now, the only ones I'd really kind of say have a serious look at would be winter peas. Then maybe we can just walk over and have a look at the winter lentils. So again, I'm just going to kind of have a quick look at my notes. And so, as I mentioned, I think there is definitely promise for winter peas down the road. And I've actually been very impressed with the winter lentil. The only variety we've been working with is Morton. Is that the winter variety, and then the spring variety we've been comparing it to is a CDC Redberry that comes out of the breeding program at Saskatoon. Again, 3 seeding dates. Ideally, we wanted to seed May 1st, May 15th, and May 30th. Unfortunately, our first seeding date last fall was the 13th of September, so much later than what I would have wanted to. Here you can see a Morton late seeded, so that would have been actually seeded in early October. We have 3 seeding rates. 110, 165, and 220 plants per square meter. So this would be at the medium seeding rate. Here's 220 at the high rate. Again, 165 would be the rate that we typically see the spring varieties at, and you can see that this spring variety is coming through quite nicely. And then here's Morton seeded early, which have been the 13th of September at the high seeding rate, and it actually looks pretty good. And we might even find it's actually going to be almost a little bit too thick at the end of the day. So probably the mid seeding rate of around 165 plants per square meter, seeded early, tends to be the one that's looking the best. In terms of the overall results, again, Lethbridge had severe flooding. We did get the water pumped off right away, but it was still kind of questionable. But at Brooks, things actually turned out fairly well. And we did have a site at High River. At High River, the 165 and the 220 plants per square meter at the first seeding day gave us the best yields compared to the Redberry. However, at Brooks, it was really the third seeding date that gave the best yield at Brooks at the middle seeding rate. So things are not always consistent. But then we have to keep in mind High River is kind of in the thin black soil zone, and Brooks is in the brown soil zone, so 2 uniquely different climatic areas.
So again, you know, I think that there's some good promise for winter lentils, but we're going to continue this work for at least one more year before
Do
we
you have
want
weevil
to.
problems with these too?
No, the nice thing about lentils is we don't have much in the way of insect problems. Hector, do you know of any insect problems that are?
No, I think maybe grasshoppers, if there's nothing else to eat, they might attack.
Yep. So in the worst case, grasshoppers will eat just about anything. They'll even eat barns if they have to.
Grasshoppers actually are kind of nasty at the flowering stage, so they take the petals off on freshly spring lentils. Grasshoppers in July are sort of noted to, at very low rates, so
Right.
bite off the petals.
But the pea leaf will only attacks fava beans and peas.
Okay.
And that's the only two crops that they're concerned.
How are these for nitrogen fixing compared to your?
Actually, both lentils and peas are actually reasonably good at fixing their own nitrogen. So as long as your soil test levels are, if you have 20 pounds of nitrogen or higher in your soil in that top foot, then there's no need to put on any nitrogen fertilizer. Now, having said that, we've really not done much fertility work with any of the winter crops, like any of the winter pulse crops. And so if we decide that there's going to be some really good opportunities, then there's certainly other things we're going to have to look at. Because right now we're just looking at seeding date and seeding rate and looking at survival. That's kind of the main thing we're looking at. And Ken's been doing some herbicide work. But then we'd have to be a little bit more aggressive in terms of looking at some of the other factors like soil fertility, phosphorus response, and things like that. There's certainly a lot of other things we need to be looking at to understand how would we best grow these. But like I say, initially, if we can find the right seeding rate and the seeding date for these crops, that's going to be certainly a good first start.
Is this a red lentil?
Actually, I'm colorblind, so I'm pretty sure they're red, aren't they?
Yeah, they're reds, but they're a little different than your spring reds. So
Yeah.
They actually look a little more orange.
Now the bad news when you hang around with Rob Dunn and I, we're both colorblind, so.
This looks green, Ross.
You're right, it is. So.
You can tell when they flower, actually. Pink flower
So.
versus a white flower.
Odds are, like, one out of every 15 men is partly red-green colorblind. So when you have Rob and I, we pretty much have things covered. But we can't tell the difference between red lights and green lights. So if you're driving with us, you don't have to worry. Anyway, you just kind of walk along and have a look.
Just hang on.
Yep. So as we're walking along, here's the early seeded, and in my mind, probably early seeding would be kind of the better way to go. Kind of seeding in that first 2 weeks of September. The 110 plant population is, in my mind, maybe a little bit on the light side, but the 220 is maybe a little bit on the high side because it actually almost gets to be almost too dense. So probably somewhere in that middle of the road, 165 plants per square meter would be probably the middle of the road again. So early seeded at that middle seeding rate, which would be 1.5 times normal seeding rate for typical spring seeded lentils. So any other comments, Rob? And pardon me?
When you harvest them, how much ahead of spring?
Usually the peas have been in the first 2 weeks of July, depending on the year. Last year was a little later because things were so wet. But and for lentils it would be just a little bit later. So I would say first or second week of July would be kind of the ideal for peas, and the second to fourth week of July for the lentils, depending again on the year. If it's a drier year, earlier, but if it's a normal year, probably third or fourth week. Would you agree, Ken? Or maybe even a bit later than that for yours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
So
think we've been having such different years, it's hard to come up with
Well-
a ballpark. But yeah, 2 to 3 weeks before your spring.
But a high
Yeah.
probability of missing the heat blast.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that's.
Yield advantages.
And I see that as, these are kind of some good opportunities. Now, with both winter peas and winter lentils, the one thing that does concern me is that you do have a larger seed, and so you're going to need a little bit better moisture for that germination and emergence. But that's also a concern for canola. If we go to winter canola, it's just a very small seeded shallow. And again, if you're seeding in late August, early September, what are the odds of having around here wet conditions? Well, the last 2 years have been damn good, but historically not good.
What have you been finding, sorry, as far as the seeding depths?
We actually haven't been doing any work with seeding depth. We just and especially the last couple of years, the moisture has been fairly good. So we just seeded about 1.5 inches deep for the lentils and the peas. There's really no point in going any deeper than that. But I certainly wouldn't be worried about seeding a little bit deeper if we had to, like down to 2.5 inches. But I probably wouldn't want to seed much deeper than that typically. But like I say, there's certainly a lot of other agronomic things we could be looking at. But right now, the first question was really to answer is if we have a reasonable seeding date and rate, can we get these things to over winter? And they are. So we're feeling a lot more comfortable now with this third year under our belt, and we'll feel a lot more comfortable actually developing some recommendations.
And these you'd get out of Washington too, or?
Yes. Yeah, these are out of Washington State as well. So any other questions for Ken or Rob, or anybody have any comments? Any other questions? So I think we're about 10 after 3, so we were kind of hoping to be done around 3:15 after 3. Wanted to kind of keep it fairly short, so fairly short and sweet.
Ken, do you want to just mention, I guess, next week?
Yeah, I think as far as continuing with the crop walks, we're planning on doing a whole schwack of them this year, so we pretty much have every Thursday sort of slated for the rest of June. I'm not sure that for next Thursday we've actually chosen a topic that we're still hoping to go ahead with next week. Is that right? Yeah. So just look for an email, look for our websites. We've also been posting it on Roping the Web, and certainly if there's any suggestions that you have of certain topics that you might like to see addressed at a crop walk, drop any of us a line, and we'll look forward to seeing you throughout the summer. At our diagnostic field school this year is also planned, and we're just mailing out brochures just hopefully before Canada Post goes on strike. So if you don't get one, check it out. But that's 5th, 6th, and 7th of July, and it's just the same day repeated 3 days, so you can register for that, and look forward to seeing you out when you can make it.
And like I say, we have an email list that we've developed from our various conferences, and Ken's got an email list. So as long as you're on one of the two email lists, we always try to make sure that things get sent out both ways, so you find out about anything that we're doing.